Over 3,800 years ago, one man's life unfolded as a story of dreams, betrayal, and destiny. Joseph, favored yet despised, was torn from his family and cast into slavery, only to rise from the depths of despair to the heights of power. From the pit to the palace, from suffering to salvation, his journey was not just his own but part of a divine plan that shaped nations. His story is one of resilience, forgiveness, and faith in the unseen hand of God. Are you ready to follow the path of Joseph? Birth of Joseph. Joseph was born to Jacob and Rachel in 1688 BC when Jacob was 91 years old, as the long-awaited son of his father's beloved wife. After years of struggle, Rachel finally gave birth to Joseph, a child Jacob cherished deeply. As the firstborn of Rachel, Joseph quickly became Jacob's favorite, receiving special attention and, later, a coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's deep love. This favoritism, however, did not go unnoticed, and his brothers grew increasingly resentful of him. A young man's dreams. Before Joseph turned 17 he had two dreams that would shape his future and stir tension within his family. In one dream, his brothers' sheaves of grain bowed to his, a clear symbol of leadership. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him, hinting at a role of great significance. Though Joseph may not have fully understood the meaning, it was clear that these dreams were not mere fantasies, they were glimpses into a divine plan. Jacob, sensing that these dreams held deeper meaning, was troubled but also aware that God had a special purpose for Joseph's life, even if it would challenge the family's understanding of their future. Brothers' revenge. One day when Joseph was 17, he approached his brothers. They saw him coming from a distance and mocked, "Here comes the dreamer." Their hatred bubbled over, and without warning, they seized him. Stripped of his coat, they threw him into a pit, leaving him alone in the darkness. His heart pounded, filled with confusion and doubt. "Why, God?" he wondered. "How could this be part of your plan?" His once confident faith faltered as he remembered the dreams of his brothers bowing before him. Just then, the sound of a caravan grew near. His brothers pulled him from the pit, but instead of freeing him, they sold him for silver. Later, they dipped his coat in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, claiming Joseph was dead, leaving him to grieve in despair. Joseph sold to Potiphar. Joseph stood in the bustling Egyptian marketplace, shackled and weary. The Ishmaelite traders led him forward, bartering with potential buyers. Then came Potiphar, a high-ranking official, examining him with a calculating gaze. Silver exchanged hands. Joseph was now his property. The foreign language around him felt like a flood of unknown sounds, isolating him further. Fear gripped him. How would he serve without understanding commands? Was this truly God's plan? Yet, despite the confusion, he clung to faith. He had lost everything, his family, his freedom, but not God. In this strange land, he resolved to trust and serve faithfully. Joseph oversees Potiphar's household. Joseph's dedication and wisdom set him apart in Potiphar's house. Though a foreigner, he quickly adapted, managing tasks with diligence. Potiphar noticed that everything Joseph handled prospered, for the Lord was with him. Impressed, Potiphar entrusted Joseph with full control over his household, from servants to finances. Under Joseph's leadership, the household flourished like never before. Potiphar had no concerns, except for the food he ate. That remained his only personal matter. Despite his position, Joseph never forgot he was still a servant. Yet deep within, he sensed God's hand at work, preparing him for something greater. Joseph resists temptation. Joseph carried out his duties faithfully, overseeing Potiphar's household with diligence. But Potiphar's wife watched him with desire, drawn to his strength and success. Day after day, she pursued him, tempting him to lie with her. Joseph refused, saying, "How could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He avoided her, but one day, when they were alone, she grabbed his cloak, demanding he stay. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak behind. Humiliated, she twisted the story, accusing him of assault. Potiphar, enraged, had Joseph thrown into prison. Yet even in chains, Joseph knew God was still with him. A new Pharaoh arises. It is the year 1664 BC, and from the depths of his prison cell in Memphis, Joseph could hear the distant echoes of a grand celebration. The city was alive with music, trumpets, and the rhythmic beat of drums, the sound of Egypt welcoming their new pharaoh, Aya, and his queen, Eni. Even within the prison walls, the excitement spread among the inmates, as some murmured about royal pardons traditionally granted during a coronation. Yet, for Joseph, there was no sign of freedom. Years had passed since he was unjustly imprisoned, and still, he waited. Did God still see him? Had his dreams been for nothing? As the night wore on and the echoes of the city's joy faded, Joseph remained where he was, alone, forgotten by men, but not by God. His time had not yet come, but the plan was already in motion. Joseph interprets two dreams. In prison, Joseph was assigned to two of Pharaoh's servants, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, both imprisoned for offending the king. One night, they each had troubling dreams but found no one to interpret them. Seeing their distress, Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer described a vine with 3 branches, which budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes that he pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interpreted, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you." The baker, hopeful, shared his dream of 3 baskets of bread, but birds ate from them. Joseph solemnly replied, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will execute you." 3 days later, events unfolded exactly as Joseph had said. Pharaoh's dreams. In the planting season of 1658 BC, Pharaoh Aya had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, 7 healthy cows emerged from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 thin, sickly cows. In the second, 7 full ears of grain grew, but 7 withered ears swallowed them up. None in Pharaoh's court could interpret them. Then, the chief butler remembered Joseph. Quickly summoned from prison, Joseph washed, changed clothes, and stood before Pharaoh. "I cannot interpret dreams, but God can," Joseph said. He explained, "The 2 dreams are one. 7 years of abundance will come, followed by 7 years of famine. God has revealed this so you may prepare." Pharaoh listened, amazed at Joseph's wisdom. Joseph becomes vizier of Egypt. Joseph stood before Pharaoh, having interpreted the dreams. But he did not stop there. "Let Pharaoh appoint a wise man to store grain during the 7 good years, so Egypt will not perish in the famine," he advised. Pharaoh, seeing God's wisdom in Joseph, declared, "There is no one as wise as you. You shall be over my house, only in the throne will I be greater." He placed his signet ring on Joseph's hand, dressing him in fine linen and a gold chain. Joseph had become Egypt's vizier, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph rode in Pharaoh's second chariot, as heralds cried, "Bow the knee." The people watched in awe. This Hebrew prisoner had become Egypt's vizier, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph prepares for famine. Joseph oversaw the construction of great store cities, preparing for the years of famine. As the harvests flourished, he bought grain from farmers, sealing each transaction with the scarab stamp of his signet ring. Even Pharaoh Aya and Queen Ini supported the effort, using their own signet rings to purchase grain for Egypt's reserves. Year after year, the surplus grew. By the 7th year, the storehouses overflowed, and they stopped counting. The grain was beyond measure. But as the planting season in the 7th year neared, the Nile's inundation was low, and the rains did not come. Joseph pondered if this was the beginning of the famine God had revealed. The drought begins and was severe. The rains did not come, and the crops withered under the scorching sun. It was not just Egypt that suffered. Canaan, too, felt the grip of famine. As hunger spread, Joseph ordered the grain stores to be opened. Egyptians and Canaanites came in droves, purchasing grain with their money to survive. Yet, as the 2nd year began, the Nile's inundation remained low, and the rains still did not fall. Joseph watched the skies and the barren fields, pondering. How long will this continue, he wondered. But he knew, God had foretold this. The famine was unfolding exactly as he had revealed. The brothers' reunion with Joseph. As famine ravaged the land, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain. Weary and desperate, they bowed before Egypt's powerful vizier, never realizing he was Joseph, the brother they had betrayed. Joseph recognized them instantly, but his heart wrestled with emotion. "You are spies," he accused, testing them. He demanded they bring Benjamin, holding Simeon as a hostage. When they returned, he treated them kindly but secretly placed his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers begged for mercy, Judah offered himself in Benjamin's place. Overcome with emotion, Joseph wept and cried out, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Seeing their fear, he reassured them, "Do not be afraid. God sent me ahead to save lives." With tears of joy, he embraced them. "Go, bring my father to me." The years of pain melted away, his family would be whole again. The meeting of Joseph and Jacob in Goshen. In the land of Goshen, the long-awaited reunion between Joseph and Jacob took place. Jacob, now an aged patriarch, had traveled from Canaan with his entire household, leaving behind the famine-stricken land to settle under Pharaoh's protection. Jacob, holding his son for the first time in over 20 years, whispered words filled with relief and fulfillment. "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." For Joseph, this moment was the final piece in a story of suffering, redemption, and divine purpose. The one who had been sold into slavery had become the instrument of salvation for his family. What men had meant for evil, God had used for good. The house of Israel would endure. The famine continues. As Jacob and his family settled in Egypt, the famine continued relentlessly. Year after year, the drought gripped the land, leaving nothing for the people to harvest. At first, they bought grain with silver, but soon their money was gone. Desperate, they traded their livestock, horses, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. When even their animals were spent, they surrendered their land to Pharaoh, making him the sole landowner in Egypt. The people were relocated into store cities, now fully dependent on Pharaoh's provisions. During these 5 years, the 14th dynasty at Avaris collapsed under the weight of famine, and with it, Pharaoh became the undisputed king over all Egypt, ruling with absolute authority. Joseph restores the land and retires. After 7 long years of famine, the Nile's inundation had returned. The land, once barren, began to show signs of renewal. The people sold their land to Pharaoh during the crisis, yet now, with wisdom and fairness, Joseph restored their fields, their horses, and livestock. In return, he established a law: 20% of every harvest would belong to Pharaoh. Grateful, the people declared, "You have saved our lives." When the first full harvest was gathered, Joseph knew his work was complete. His final act as vizier fulfilled, he stepped down and settled in Bubastis, near his family, to live out his days in peace. The decline under Pharaoh Ini. In 1641 BC, Pharaoh Aya passed away after a long and prosperous reign. From his headquarters in Memphis, he had ruled over a stable and thriving Egypt, strengthened by Joseph's wise administration during the years of famine. His son, Ini, ascended the throne. However, for reasons lost to history, he moved their royal headquarters more than 100 kilometers south of Memphis. This decision would prove costly. With the royal court farther from the strategic centers of power, their control began to weaken. Now distant from the heart of the delta, they struggled to maintain authority, particularly in Avaris, where their grip on power began to slip away. The rise of the Hyksos. The Hyksos, led by Seleucus, seized the opportunity presented by Egypt's weakened administration. Within just 5 years after the death of Pharaoh Aya, by 1637 BC, they grew strong enough to capture Heliopolis and Memphis. However, they bypassed the Bubastis region, where Jacob and his family resided. With their rise to power, a new king emerged in the delta, marking the beginning of Hyksos rule over Lower Egypt. Honoring a great man, Jacob. After Jacob's passing, Joseph sought permission to bury his father in Canaan. With the Hyksos ruling the delta, he had no direct access to Pharaoh and sent his request through intermediaries. Permission was granted, allowing him to fulfill his father's final wish. A grand funeral procession set out. The Hyksos, now in power, sent their own delegation to oversee the journey. Joseph and his brothers traveled under their watch, accompanied by Egyptian officials and a powerful escort of chariots. The ruler of Thebes also sent a delegation to pay respects. At the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan, they mourned deeply. Then, Jacob was laid to rest in the cave of Machpelah, fulfilling his last request. Joseph, the dreamer, dies. After Jacob's death, Joseph and his brothers continued to live in harmony, prospering under Hyksos rule. The family grew, their people multiplying in the land of Goshen, enjoying peace and stability. Years passed, and Joseph, now old and full of wisdom, gathered his family. He reminded them of God's promise, that one day, he would lead them back to Canaan. Before his death, Joseph made them swear an oath: "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." In 1578 BC, Joseph died at 110 years old. The Egyptians embalmed him, but unlike others, his body was not placed in a grand tomb. Instead, it was carefully hidden, waiting for the day Israel would leave Egypt. Thus ended the life of Joseph, a man of faith, wisdom, and resilience, who rose from slavery to save nations, reunited a broken family, and left behind a legacy of hope, trusting that God's promise would one day be fulfilled.